Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the all-inclusive Mega Man X Retrospective. This time we're looking at Mega Man X4. What to say that hasn't already been said? Well, as you know, X1 to X3 were some of my favorite side-scrolling games of all time, with cool weapons, great soundtracks, well-designed levels, and ultimately replay value that was through the roof. However, given X2 and X3's high price and release date being so late into the SNES's lifespan, the sales for those two were far lower than X1. So for X4 they decided to move to a console with a larger install base, that being the Sony PlayStation. X4 was also released on the Sega Saturn and PC, but I have no experience with either of those, and I have heard that other than the graphical stuff, the games are pretty much identical. By this point in gaming history, 3D was all the rage. However, Capcom decided for whatever reason that they had to stick to the second dimension for both this and the previous game on the PS1, Mega Man 8, and the next two games as well. While it might not have been a common decision, seeing as many game franchises were making the jump to 3D, but I think it's a decision that paid off since they could focus on more important things like the game design, since many games from this era don't hold up very well since the developers were tasked with making something that was far outside their comfort zone. Like I said, given X2 and especially X3's low sales, the developers decided to keep things simple this time around and refine the Mega Man X gameplay, as opposed to tackling extra clutter in the game. The final product being Mega Man X4, which is considered to this day by many Mega Man X fans one of the best, if not the best, Mega Man X game there is, for many reasons I'll definitely get into before this video's over. Am I among this popular opinion? Well, absolutely I am, but not always. After I played and didn't care for X3, I played X4, and I disliked it for similar reasons as X3. Mainly because I was dying a lot and didn't have the Wii U's restore point system to fall back on this time. The game was even more difficult in my eyes as Zero, though, since he really gave me trouble. X4, as I tried to get better at it, like the other X games, I grew to appreciate it more and more, and called it my third favorite X game to play alongside X1 and X3. So with that said, let's start this review by talking about the worst aspect of X4, that being the storyline. X4 takes place after the events of Mega Man Extreme 2, but we'll get to that game later. The world is at peace once again, with two groups aiding the humans now, one of course being the Maverick Hunters with X and Zero, but also the Repli Force, led by two robots named General and Colonel. However, Sigma's back at it again and plant seeds of rebellion against humans in the Repli Force, and so they act upon it, and as a result are labeled Mavericks by the Maverick Hunters. And so X and Zero must defeat them. In addition to that, X meets a new allied character by the name of Double, and Zero is aided by the Colonel's sister, Iris. By the end, Double turns out to be a double agent for Sigma and tries to defeat X, to which X destroys him. Meanwhile, Zero battles and defeats Colonel, and this upsets Iris, obviously, and so she decides to take revenge on Zero and kill him, even though the two are beginning to develop a relationship, and Zero defeats her and she dies. X and Zero find out Sigma was behind this whole thing, and that all the death could have been avoided if Sigma had just stayed dead. So they defeat Sigma again, and in the end, after seeing all his allies go Maverick, X wonders what will happen if he ever went Maverick and requests Zero to finish him off if that happens, and Zero realizes that it might be his destiny to be a Maverick despite all the good he tries to do. So it sounds okay, right? Well, in actuality, it's extremely convoluted, seeing as it's not really clear what's going on for most of it unless you played the other games in the X series, and also the classic series. A huge example being how Zero has flashbacks to moments where he was being created, and this is how we learn for the very first time in any Mega Man game that Zero was the last creation of Dr. Wily, the main villain of the classic series. These dreams are just really vague, especially the one where we see that Sigma used to lead the Maverick Hunters and that Zero initially carried the Maverick virus, and in a battle with Sigma, transferred it to him, and he became a Maverick, and Zero went good. But none of that gets explained in this game very well. This game has two different stories, one where X does all the work and one where Zero does all the work, and the plots just don't interconnect very well, and I don't think they were meant to, so I just did my best to explain the plot as a whole. The game also takes itself fairly seriously with a bunch of drama crammed in, which wouldn't be so heinous if the characters used in this drama weren't all new to the series, like the Repli Force characters or Double. The weight just isn't there since we don't know these characters. The anime cutscenes do look nice at the very least, however, the huge elephant in the room that brings down the whole story has got to be the god-awful voice acting. Any line that was supposed to be made dramatic is instantly laughable, like when Zero and Colonel, two Reploids that were once friends, are turned enemies.
It's not too late. Stop the coup now! Never. If that's your decision, prepare yourself!
Or how Sigma just sounds completely ridiculous no matter what line it is.
And now, my Maverick Hunters, what will you do? I'll be watching closely from here on out.
X for some reason sounds like a little girl when, you know, that's not his character. Some of these turned into some of the most infamous lines in gaming history.
No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
And those awkward cuts are just horrible. The rest I think can speak for themselves.
without fear, for we are the Repliforce.
The most powerful army in history!
But Zero, what if I become one of the Mavericks?
Don't ask such a silly question. I'm breaking contact now.
Wait, Zero! I'm serious!
So, this is what happened to me. This is my fate. I couldn't save anyone after all. Iris!
I am aware that this was the generation standard for voice acting at the time, but honestly, of all the late 90s games I've played, Mega Man X4 and Mega Man 8 really take the cake for some of the worst acting I've ever heard. But at the very least, it was the industry standard. I don't actually mind this stuff though, since the bad acting is so bad it's good, but judging it on its own merits, it's pretty frickin' terrible. Honestly, the worst part is, this isn't even the worst voice acting in the X series. What is? We'll see later in the retrospective. Now that the story and acting is finally out of the way, let's do a 180 on this review and talk about how great this game is. This game, similar to the classic series game Mega Man and Base, right at the beginning lets you choose to be either X or Zero, and both characters go through the same 8 stages with different abilities, and 2 different gameplay styles. Unlike Mega Man and Base, where there was no reason to experience the game more than once, since both characters unlocked the same set of weapons, and one had the clear advantage over the other, making the other character completely useless. I don't have much to say about the intro stage, since it's fairly standard stuff with some wall jumping and a ton of things to avoid to prepare you for the journey ahead. From there, we as usual have 8 new Mavericks to take on with easily, by far, the best level design in any Mega Man game. Keep in mind that I was not prepared to say that, but playing this game after the first 3, I can clearly see that levels no longer go on for too long and the design is constantly presenting enemies in your way as well as platforming. The design of the levels are beautifully balanced for the 2 characters, since no stage element felt like I was hindered by being the wrong character, since X and Zero can make their way through the stages with not much crap coming from it. However, both characters have drastically different combat methods, meaning that the player, depending on their choice at the beginning, must tailor their playstyle around these abilities. X plays the same as he always has, with the X-Buster and the charge shot that grows bigger the longer you wait, and the dash. Zero now has a fully integrated Z-Saber this time around, and of course has more than 1 life this time. Thank you. Seriously, I have no idea who thought that was a good idea. With the Z-Saber, Zero can perform a 3-slash combo to make short work of enemies in your pathway, which is incredibly satisfying to pull off. I think the reason for that is because of how well Zero's attacks are animated, since it's clear what the right time to use each of his attacks are, as well as being clear what parts of the animation hit enemies, which is the reason why it's satisfying to kill several enemies with 1 combo. For the most part, I don't have much to say about the level design specifically for each level, since 7 out of the 8 stages are filled with exactly everything I'm looking for in a Mega Man X level in terms of enemy placement, item location, and so on. The stars of the show are definitely Sabre Peacock stage and Storm Owl's level. The other ones have their moments of greatness as well, but overall I love the gimmick in Sabre Peacock stage, since it requires you make your way through 3 obstacle courses, and going through them perfectly, which isn't too hard since the timing required to get an S rank is very forgiving, rewards you with the stage's Heart Tank, Sub Tank, and Capsule. Storm Owl is by far the best mix of platforming and combat, since you have to do a fair amount of both, but it never feels repetitive, unlike the mindless button mashing of X3. I am happy to see that in X4, Split Mushroom is the only stage in the game to have a long elevator sequence, since I noticed in X2 and X3 there were a lot of those. So as opposed to breaking the pace, this serves as a good break from the core gameplay. I also can't get enough of timing my jumps around the Magma Rocks and Magma Dragoon stage, or exploring the diverse areas of Web Spider stage. The notable exception to all this great design is Jet Stingray's level, which sees X and Zero piloting a ride chaser through a deadly obstacle course. It's actually really short, but it's the definition of trial and error, since it's probably impossible to get it all right and collect everything in the first try without dying. I know even I struggle with that today on my god knows how manyth playthrough. However, the thing about trial and error is, once you get it right, you get it right. You'll die a few times, and then you're good to go. I used to hate this level with a passion, but I can now do it my first try, but not always, which is what I meant when I said I had trouble with it a few seconds ago. Do I think this is a bad level because of how trial and error heavy it is? Absolutely I do, it's terrible. But the thing is, some have used this level as an argument against the whole game, but also say that the ride armors, Zero, and the difficulty balancing in X3 were temporary flaws. And once you know them, they aren't worth criticizing. So couldn't I say the exact same thing about this level? I won't for either game, since bad design is bad design, end of story. The stuff from X3 I just mentioned was bad, and so is this stage. Moving on though, level changes from X1 and X3 are gone again. But in this game, I really don't miss them. Reason is, X4 has world building and other means, like how in Frost Walrus' stage you'll see Chill Penguin from X1 and Blizzard Buffalo from X3 frozen in ice. The game never bothers to talk about it or anything, it's just a fun Easter egg. Another example being how you can interact with the environment in ways many players might not have thought of, like using the ice weapon to freeze some of the lava in Magma Dragoon's level, or using the fire weapon to burn tree bark in Web Spider's stage. or how the intro stage boss chases you for the first half of the intro stage, and you can actually kill him to get him out of your hair for a while. It doesn't mean you don't have to fight him later, but the attention to detail is commendable. My favorite detail being how 6 of the Mavericks work for Repliforce, and in the boss fight they have the Repliforce logo under their health bars, but Magma Dragoon and Split Mushroom, the two that don't, have the Sigma logo under their health bars, indicating their true allegiance through subtle hints, which relates to the attention to detail I was talking about just now. X4 brings the amount of collectibles down from X3, which is welcome in my eyes. We have 8 heart tanks, which still increase your maximum health, and 4 sub-tanks. I guess instead we have 2 sub-tanks now, which means you'll have to be more tactical about your sub-tank usage. Taking the place of the other 2 sub-tanks would be 1, the weapon energy tank, that when fully charged will fill all of X's weapon energy. Although I rarely need that for a reason to be explained later. Zero can still get this too, but it's pretty useless for him given the fact that he only has one ability that requires ammunition. Maybe a 3rd sub-tank would have worked for him since he does have the more difficult playthrough. The last tank is the EX tank, which increases your default lives from 2 to 4. In addition to that, the checkpoint system has also been improved quite a bit, since in the last 3 games, getting a game over resulted in redoing the entire stage from the beginning, but here levels are divided into 2 sections, and getting a game over on the second half means you only have to do the second half again. X again goes into the mission unarmored, so apparently Dr. Light recorded 5 new messages and parts for X. The foot parts allow X to dash horizontally, but unfortunately not vertically. Instead, he can hover in the air for a brief bit, which can come in handy, but not all that much. The body parts reduce damage by 50%, and upon taking damage, it's transferred into the ability called the Nova Strike, which is very situational given how few the amount of opportunities are to use it, but it can help with platformer or getting through a line of enemies in your way. The head parts give X infinite weapon ammo for every single special weapon, which is absolutely awesome for obvious reasons, since you can just go nuts with everything and still be able to use the weakness on the boss. That's why I usually don't need the weapon energy tank. However, charging your special weapons still takes ammo. Speaking of which, the arm parts allow you to charge special weapons, but in this game you have the choice between 2 separate arm parts. The one right in front of your face gives you this really lame 4 charge shot thing that upon fully charging you can release 4 tiny blasts. I can never find a use for this thing, so every time I try, since it's so vastly inferior to the other one, that being the plasma shot, which fires a huge blast that goes through objects and stays on the first enemy it hits for several seconds, continuing to do damage, I always run right back and trade the 4 charge shot thing for the plasma shot. But on most playthroughs I get the plasma shot, since, you know, it's the good one. The best thing here being how you can swap between these two at any time in the game, so feel free to experiment for yourself. I just love how this game rewards your curiosity, since at this point you would have already gotten an arm part, but if you continue to the left, you get this one. That's vastly superior. That kind of level design is greatly appreciated. Getting to them can be troublesome, but given the new checkpoint system, I can try an infinite amount of times with no repercussions, since this capsule is right next to the checkpoint. With all that said, we've assembled the 4th armor, and it is easily the best one in the series. I prefer the foot parts to the 3rd armor, but the other 3 more than make up for that, since it already has the best head parts, the best body parts, and the best arm parts any X game has ever seen. Which is why it's no surprise it's in X5, X6, and X8. We aren't done with armors just yet though, since in this game you can input 2 passcodes on the character select screen. One makes X purple, but upon finding a capsule, X gets the ultimate armor. If you remember the gold armor in X3, this is pretty much the same thing, since it's an enhanced 4th armor with an unlimited Nova Strike. I like the fact that you have to find it, since you're turning on God mode basically by using it, since the Nova Strike is incredibly broken when it's unlimited. But if you don't find it, then you're stuck with Naked X for the whole time, so it creates a great risk versus reward scenario. For Zero, the password grants him the black armor, however in this game it's not a stats boost at all. It's strictly cosmetic, although it does look cool, so I'd say it gets the job done, and especially complements the purple Z-Sabre you can get later very well. What's great about the heart tanks and sub-tanks and armors in this game is the placement. It could not have been any better in another X game. The heart tanks are all simple to find that might require a bit of outside-the-box thinking, but nothing too complex. The sub-tanks and armors being the same way. X4 has no traces of issues like everything needed the dash in X1, or X2 needing you to know that all the hidden spots are there without you having any idea they would be, or in X3 where they just dangle power-ups in front of your face and you have no idea how you can get it and the answer is extremely convoluted. The customization is at an all-time high since many of the power-ups require different things, which means discovering secrets is never repetitive. And lastly, thank the stars that there is next to no backtracking in this game. In X1 to X3, if you had a good route, there was next to no backtracking, but many players go in weakness order, and in especially X3, many power-ups have to be gone back for. That serves as a smooth segue into the Mavericks. X4 has 8 Mavericks, and I love the fact that the official boss order is fantastic for item collection, as well as other orders that the player would like to go through, which is how it should be. The only way to make a ton of backtracking in this game would be to intentionally or unintentionally go through a bad order. If it's unintentional, then it's probably a first playthrough. and as a result probably isn't 100%. At the very least, I don't try to 100% a game on my first playthrough. The boss fights are superbly designed, each one of them with patience and observation is very beatable as a first pick, as evidenced by the fact that I made it all the way to the final boss as No Armor X. Without the weaknesses, these guys are a ton of fun to fight with a wide variety of attack patterns for you to dodge. Take Split Mushroom for example. When I tried him without his weakness at 0, I died 6 times, but I never got frustrated once since the whole time I was having the time of my life, getting better and better at it each time and finally beating him. This is the segregation between good and bad difficulty. If it's good, it should never result in frustration because you shouldn't die from anything that wasn't in your control. I was presented with a pattern that while going very quickly is not badly designed because it's clear what you need to do, you just need to execute with good timing and practice. Unfortunately, as X with their weaknesses, the bosses turn into pushovers with mindless pattern resets and offering next to no challenge at all. This isn't exclusive to X4 though, since a large percentage of Mega Man games have the exact same problem. Not that it's excused, I'm just saying that I don't think this is any worse than any other Mega Man game. Which is why more recently I've opted to not use the weaknesses since the bosses are such a blast to fight without them. X4 has been criticized in the past for not having something akin to the X-Hunters of the Nightmare Police. But even that isn't true, since 1. Halfway through X's playthrough, the Colonel challenges X to a battle and the player is forced to oblige and fight him. Which is a great fight, by the way, given how it tests your timing skills very well. The point is, Colonel interrupting the game and challenging the player to a battle is no different from how the Nightmare Police handled in X3, with the exception of Vile Mark II. In general, X4 has been criticized for lack of innovation in the X series, which is completely absurd. Mega Man X is just as good as he ever has been, with one of the best armors in the franchise. There isn't anything worth criticizing there. Since there have been tons and tons and tons of Mega Man games with the exact same gameplay preceding this one, so there's no way it could be a killer issue here. X4 adds Zero as a fully integrated playable character, and no, X3 does not count in that regard since Zero sucked ass and was not even close to fully integrated. He was playable, but in the least possible form. In addition, X4 gives Zero, as I've already established, the Z-Sabre for that amazing 3-slash combo. I cannot believe that people write this off as a nothing addition when this gameplay was featured in every X game to follow it, as well as all 4 Zero games, as well as the 2 ZX games, and having an item that performs a similar function in both Legends games. Sure is a nothing addition, huh? The weapons in X4 are alright. I think X's weapons are mid-tier for Mega Man X standards. I think this selection is better than X2 since they are fairly good in combat, but they don't match the devastating power of the ones from X1 and X3, since most of the time the X-Buster does the job just fine. The only one I really don't care for is Lightning Web, since it's very awkward to use, but I don't think it's as bad as something like Strike Chain. Zero, however, gets these Sabre skills that can be activated with button combinations. These are actually really useful since they can do things the Z-Sabre can't do, and given the button combinations can be seamlessly integrated into the flow of the game, such as the fire ability allowing you to attack enemies in the air from the ground, or the ice ability allowing you to instantly strike enemies who are below you. This helps make bosses with their weaknesses still fun to play as Zero since they don't break the boss's AI, and with the electric one specifically you're stopped in your place, and so while you might do more damage with it, you might take damage in the process, so it's a risk versus reward situation again. Not every boss gives Zero a Z-Sabre ability as well. Some might just be an air dash or something like that, making it so that the player can't just rely on weaknesses to carry them through the game. The best one by far is Split Mushroom, since it allows Zero to double jump and spin his Z-Sabre around like it's a Super Star Wars game or something, only with 100 times less frustration. Seriously, those games are really annoying. But this is easily one of the most satisfying abilities I've ever used in a Mega Man game, since enemies are brutally damaged by it, and it's so satisfying to just slash your way through everything. The game isn't broken though, since the bosses can still give you a run for your money. Reasons like this are why I love how X4 was designed. With this game being on newer hardware, the sprites have seen an increase in detail from the SNES games, and I like the look of them quite a bit, with some well-implemented 3D backgrounds such as the spiral staircase and Split Mushroom stage. The other levels don't mesh as well, but I don't think it looks bad, but ultimately it's pretty hard to describe why I don't think it looks the greatest. I think that sticking to the 2D was a great choice though for game design, like I said, but graphically this game doesn't have to worry about polygonal models that age terribly. As a result, graphically, I think Mega Man X4 is one of the best on the system. I feel that X4's presentation had a budget put into it since the intro movie looks great, and the cutscenes as well, while having the awful acting, the animation is perfectly fine. Enhancing this presentation would be the amazing soundtrack. My colleague Nick Magna has described X4 as having an emotional soundtrack, which is very hard to describe how exactly it does, but I agree with him 100%. out of the way, we can head into the final stages, starting with the spaceport and then the final weapon, a space colony that Repliforce is occupying. The spaceport as X is one of my favorite levels in the game. It's extremely short, but that's a strength it has. And another one being how in the main Maverick stages, and this goes for any Mega Man game, the levels are a potential first choice for a new player, and so they wouldn't have any abilities on them, and so the game can't design the main pathway around these abilities. The final stages are different since they're only playable, assuming no cheats are used, by beating the main stages first, so you would have to have them by this point, so the level design can take advantage of it. This game gives X a mini tutorial on using his weapons by lining enemies up in ways that the X-Buster would be an obvious disadvantage in. In all my X4 playthroughs, I'm still never tired of experimenting with how many ways I can use the weapons here. It's a ton of fun. At the end, X or Zero must battle the Colonel, and I love this fight even more than the last one, since it relies very heavily on your timing and reflex skills when dodging his laser attacks. And I love it even more as Zero since both characters have an upgraded Sabre, making the battle more intense since the characters are both equal in their combat ability. After that is when X must battle Double and Zero has to fight Iris, and both are tricky to get right in the first time, but neither is impossible either. I say tricky since Double is pretty much a war of attrition until someone dies, and the battle with Iris is pretty much the same way, only to a lesser extent. The end of the second stage is where the boss with the general is, and it's just plain boring since I spend most of it as X just hanging on the wall and shooting the air and hoping it hits him, and as Zero I just try to kill him before he kills me. Not a bad boss, but certainly not good. With that said, the boss rush stage begins again, and my god, as X with the weaknesses, it's just as bad as the last two games, since once again, you have to effortlessly pave your way over these guys, but without it, it can be a fun challenge to try to get through them without using any sub-tanks. Especially as Zero, since like I said earlier, the bosses are more difficult as him to begin with. After that, we must battle Sigma again with a pathetically easy first phase that can be killed in 2 charge shots from X, and a second phase that's easy enough but still provides enough challenge to be a final boss. Sigma's final phase is in 3 parts that he alternates through. One where he's a full body that you can attack, another where he's a giant head, and another where robots attack you. This phase of the boss can go on for quite some time, and each part of the boss has attacks that are really good for the player since you can get a ton of shots in, and others where you just can't. This leads to a very huge issue. If you die here, it is very possible to do it without sub-tanks, since that's what I did as Zero in this run, but most players are probably going to want to get more sub-tank energy, and we'll go back to the great grinding spot on Frost Walrus' stage. Go back and have to go through the whole tedious boss rush again. And for some ungodly reason, the boss rush stage and the final boss are the same levels now, unlike the previous games. At the very least, saving in this level means you can come back to this level at any time, unlike having to redo the whole castle again like in the previous games, but still having the boss rush in the same stage as the final boss is just terrible. If it was my game, there wouldn't be a boss rush to begin with, but these reviews aren't about rewriting the game, it's about critiquing what's there. The last levels are definitely good, but I think they could have been better. I think Spaceport was fine, and the final weapon is a cool section where the path splits into 2, but they could have taken it further by actually having something that incentivizes revisiting the stage to see what's in the path you didn't take. But no, both lead to the same thing. Other than that, I really don't have much else to say about X4, so let's wrap it up. Going into recording footage for this video, I was expecting X4 to be just as good as I remembered, and tell you how I think it's a good game with some flaws. I am shocked to say, even though I have played this game many times in the past, I was completely blown away this time around by how well designed X4 truly is. Again, on the first go, I didn't like this game because I sucked at it, but for so long my position on it has been like I said, it's really good but not much more. But after playing it for this video, I can safely tell you, Mega Man X4 is by far my favorite game in the series. X1 had flawed difficulty balancing, X2 was just meh, and X3 was kind of a mess. I was going to say I prefer playing X1 and 3, but I'm not even sure about that anymore. I played X1 3 times for my review and I got sick of it. I played X2 about 5 times and I was sick of it on the first run. And X3 was also 5 times and I was extremely sick of it for a much different reason, but that's a topic for another day. This game, I played 8 times. The last 3 times I didn't even need the footage. I just think X4 is on design merit alone, unmatched by any other X game, and is so fun to replay with great level design, 2 playthroughs that are extremely well done, a soundtrack that's through the roof, and boss design that's just right. The story and the way it was told was awful, but the game more than makes up for it by just having next to no bullcrap in it from start to finish. And no, Jet Stingray is not an argument since it's 1 stage out of 12 that are all great. But to be fair, pretty much all the arguments I've heard against this game recently have held no weight to me at all, as a matter of fact. But in closing, if you are a fan of 2D action side-scrollers or a fan of Mega Man and have not played this, I implore you to do so as soon as possible, since I had an amazing time playing through this game again. It's available on the Mega Man X collection, which I wouldn't recommend by the way, but I encourage you to pick it up on the PS3 or the PS Vita shop and play it. The PS1 disc won't cost you much either. So in the end, I think I've said my piece. So next up will be a review of Mega Man Extreme for the Game Boy Color. And I hope you're all looking forward to that. So with that said, I'll see you in the next video.